Goat Canyon Trestle, also known as the Impossible Railroad, was built in 1919. With a whopping cost of $18 million, it was developed as a part of the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Railway. This largest wooden railroad stretch collapsed after the 1932 earthquake and 1976 hurricane. It is now left abandoned and is surrounded by ghost stories. Goat Canyon Trestle is a wooden trestle built in 1919 as part of the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Railway. It took around 12 years to finish with a whopping cost of $18 million. The railroad required over 17 tunnels and multiple trestles to run. Its redwood planks stand 200 feet tall and 750 feet long, which is the world's largest curved wooden trestle. People worked in 120-degree heat in the summer and in extreme forces of nature to create this impossible railroad. It was made of wood instead of metal to handle the extreme temperature changes. To handle high winds, the trestle was designed with a 14 degrees curve. An earthquake in 1932 collapsed one of the portions of the tunnel. Again, a lot of damage was done by a 1976 powerful hurricane, collapsing some of the tunnels. It is also surrounded by ghost tales like stories of glowing orbs, abominable sandmen, and ghost trains. The wooden trestle is set up for new repairs, and talks of the reopening of the railroad are in the air. 2. Several Soviet-era space shuttles have lies in an abandoned hangar in Kazakhstan for nearly 30 years. These space shuttles were part of the Buran program, which aimed to take the Cold War into space. The ruins of space shuttles are all that's left of the forgotten Russian Buran program. Several Soviet-era space shuttles that used to be a part of a once proud program have been gathering dust for nearly 30 years. These two space shuttles, which were part of the famous Buran project, are tucked into an abandoned hangar at Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The famous Russian Buran project, which aimed to take the Cold War to space, was started in 1974 and was suspended in 1993. This project was the USSR's plan to outdo the US winged orbiters. TWO space shuttles were developed named Buran and Ptichka. The Buran space shuttle took off in 1988 and the other one, Ptichka, never flew. The Buran space shuttle was destroyed when the hangar collapsed due to an earthquake in 2002. The other space shuttle, Ptichka, and one more test shuttle which remained at Baikonur, represents the sad remains of the USSR's once active Buran program. Although the site is not open for public view, a few photographers and daredevils occasionally sneak in and take a look. The abandoned McDermott's Castle in Ireland was built on a 0.57-acre island in the 12th century. The current castle was built in the 1700s by the King family as a summer house. The castle is surrounded by a tragic love story of the daughter of a McDermott chieftain and a lower-class boy. It is said both of their bodies are buried on the island. Abandoned McDermott's Castle, which is located in County Roscommon, Ireland, is a national monument built in the 12th century. It is one of the most haunted castles in Ireland. Surrounded in a 0.57-acre area, the current castle was built by the King family in the late 1700s as a summer house and was later burned down due to lightning during World War II. The local legend tells of a tragic love story of Una Ban, who was the daughter of McDermott chieftain. She fell in love with a lower-class boy. Her father was against this brewing relationship. He decided to leave his daughter on the island to prevent his daughter from meeting her lower-class lover. After the Chernobyl disaster, the worst nuclear disaster was the Fukushima disaster in 2011. A 12.5-mile exclusion zone was created and caused the relocation of 160,000 people. Nature took over and covered up the abandoned vehicles, buildings, and homes. In 2011, after the Chernobyl disaster, the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan became the worst disaster that happened in 25 years. The disaster happened when a tsunami struck following an earthquake. 3 of Fukushima's Daiichi reactors were deactivated and melted, over 4 reactors were disabled. Around 12.5 miles of exclusion zone was created and over 160,000 people were displaced after the radioactive material leaked into air, sea, and soil. Thousands of vehicles, buildings, businesses, and homes were abandoned post-disaster after a warning of radioactivity. Visiting this area is risky due to radioactivity. Still, some adventure-minded people visit here at their own risk. 10 years of this accident, nature took over the buildings, vehicles, and homes. Overgrown bushes have swallowed vehicles which used to be a stretch of road near the power plant. These scenes look like they were taken from a horror movie. In 1997, the New World Mall in Bangkok was closed after it was found to have breached building regulations. Afterward, a fire in 1999 led to the destruction of the roof of the mall, allowing the rainwater inside the mall. After tilapia fish was introduced into the water to control pests, the fish thrived and multiplied. The New World Mall in Bangkok was demolished due to having breached building regulations in 1997. A partial demolition was ordered by Thailand Supreme Court. The judges concluded that 7 of the 11 floors were illegally built. In 1999, a fire broke out and left the mall without a roof. When the mall was exposed without any roof, it invited rainwater to collect in the mall, which led to an increase in mosquitoes. To get rid of the mosquitoes and other pest problems, locals decided to introduce tilapia fish into the water. Eventually, the fish thrived and multiplied, creating one of the world's strangest fisheries, attracting gawkers from around the world. The fishes roam around the 5,000 sq ft lower floor of the mall. The magically beautiful Neo-Gothic church in Portugal, built in 1882, is the wish of a wealthy landowner's ailing wife. The owner's wife wanted to create this church, but after she fell ill, her husband completed the work. Both of the husband and wife's bodies are buried in the chapel. No services are being held in the chapel. It stands abandoned to this date. A Neo-Gothic church in São Miguel, Portugal, named as Capela de Nossa Senhora das Vitórias, gives a magical, Disney-like feeling after the natural elements took over this beautiful chapel. The Chapel of Our Lady of Victories was built in 1882 by a wealthy landowner, José do Canto, in honor of his wife, Maria Guilhermina Tavera de Brum da Silveira. She intended to create this magical church, but after she fell ill, her husband took the responsibility of completing the church. After the completion of the church in 1882, José do Canto wanted to be buried next to his wife. Both husband and wife are buried next to each other in the chapel. It has 18 windows with soft focused tenderness, giving it a magical feeling. No services are being held here. It stands abandoned, having been given up to nature. The chapel is surrounded by mountains, a garden, and a lake, giving it a fairy tale look. The Beringaria Hotel, built in 1930 in Cyprus, was one of the most luxurious hotels of that time. It was built by a local village resident. The trouble began when its owner died and his 3 sons neglected the hotel while arguing about the property. Now it is silently standing in Prodromos and is famous for its ghost stories. A Majestic hotel named the Beringaria Hotel is standing in Prodromos, a famous village in Cyprus. It was abandoned for decades, but was once one of the most luxurious hotels where the royalty dined and spent their holidays. It was built in 1930 by a resident of Prodromos named Mr. Kokolos. He raised and borrowed funds to build this gorgeous site for travelers and diners. The hotel was at its peak in the middle of the 20th century, when hundreds of Europeans came to enjoy the beautiful views of the Troodos mountain range. The tragic period began for this hotel when the owner of the Beringaria Hotel died and left the hotel in the hands of his 3 sons to share equally. His sons ignored the hotel because of their pride, jealousy, and greed. It is also said that all of his 3 sons died mysteriously. The Beringaria Hotel has stood abandoned since 1984 and is surrounded by ghost stories believed by locals. The Monsell forts are the defensive platforms that were built to defend the UK from enemy aircraft during World War II. In 1942, the development of these forts started. They are located off the east coast in Thames and Mersey estuaries. After the end of the war, these forts became useless and were abandoned and left to decay into the sea. During World War II, the Monsell forts were developed as defensive platforms off the east coast in Thames and Mersey estuaries. In 1942, the construction of these forts was undertaken to defend the UK from enemy aircraft. The engineer, Guy Monsell, developed these forts to destroy enemy aircraft, and they would be sighted out at sea. These forts were expensive at that time of limited resources, but they proved their worth. After the war ended, these forts were of no use. By the 1950s, they were decommissioned one by one and were abandoned to decay into the sea. They were slowly destroyed by time and tide. Metal corroded because of saltwater, and one of the forts was demolished after a ship collided with it. Plague Fort is a bean-shaped fort built in the mid-1800s on an artificial island near St. Petersburg, Russia. The fort was used as a defensive site. It defended a naval base during Crimean War. In 1896, the fort was used as a laboratory to create medicine for the plague. In 1917, the work at Plague Fort, as it came to be called, stopped, and it has been abandoned since then. The Plague Fort, developed on an artificial island near St. Petersburg, Russia, was built by Tsar Nicholas in the mid-1800s. It was firstly named Fort Emperor Alexander. The fort was built with a motive to gain defensive control in the southern entry to St. Petersburg. The fort was used to defend the naval base during Crimean War against British and French navies. In 1894, a plague began from Hong Kong and Canton, which reached the Caspian region in 1896. At that time, the fort was converted into a laboratory to create an antidote for the plague. This is when the fort got its second name, the Plague Fort. The Institute of Experimental Medicine was transferred to the fort, and this anti-plague laboratory was called Comacham. Several doctors died during the experiments. The work at Plague Fort stopped with the beginning of World War I. Now the fort stands abandoned to lurking visitors wanting to see its unique structures and mysterious cellars. The rural Virginia field consists of 43 abandoned giant presidents' heads. The busts were to be placed at Virginia's President's Park, which cost over $10 million and was closed due to lack of visitors in 2010. The land was auctioned off after the park closed. Instead of destroying the busts, they were moved to a 400-acre farm. On the outskirts of the private farmland in Virginia sits 43 abandoned giant presidents' heads. These busts used to be part of Virginia's President Park, which went bankrupt due to lack of visitors in 2010. A man was hired by Howard Hankins to destroy the busts. He was also involved in the creation of the park. Instead of destroying these busts, he moved these busts weighing over 20,000 pounds onto his property to save them. Around 8 years have passed, and these busts are decaying and still residing on the farmland. These busts attract more visitors today that were drawn to President's Park. It seems like people are more interested in watching these busts being abandoned and decaying.